My name is Margaret Elwood, and I am 84 years old. If you asked anyone in Willow Creek, they'd tell you I lived a quiet life. They'd mention the roses in my front garden, the way I never missed Sunday pies at the diner, or how I always mailed birthday cards on time. They'd tell you I was loyal, devoted to my husband Walter for 70 years. They'd call it a love story. But they didn't see what I saw. They didn't hear what I heard. They didn't feel the way my skin crawled whenever his hand gripped my shoulder, firm and possessive, as we posed for yet another photograph of the perfect couple. For 70 years I protected him. I smiled when I wanted to scream. I defended him when whispers began. I covered his sins, because that's what I thought a good wife did. But the day everything changed wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a crash of glass or a slammed door. It was a whisper spoken too loudly at the wrong moment. It was the summer of my 84th year. The air was heavy with heat, the kind that clung to your skin and made even the bees sluggish in the garden. My granddaughter Anna had stopped by to drop off groceries. I was in the kitchen unpacking apples when I heard voices from the porch. Walter was speaking to her. His voice, once so commanding, had thinned with age, but his words carried the same venom. "You don't want to end up like your grandmother," he said. "She wasted her life hiding in this house. We, quiet, never amounting to much, kept her afloat. Without me, she'd be nothing." Anna stammered, caught off guard. "Grandpa, why would you say that?" Walter chuckled. "Because it's true. She owes me everything." The apple slipped from my hand, rolling across the counter. My chest tightened. For 70 years, I had carried his secret cruelties like stones in my pocket, dragging me down. But hearing him say it, so casually in front of my granddaughter, was like drowning all over again. I walked onto the porch. Anna's eyes widened when she saw me standing there. Walter didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair, smirking, daring me to contradict him. I didn't. "Not then." I simply said. "Anna, could you give us a moment?" She hesitated, glancing between us, then nodded and slipped inside. I faced Walter. My voice shook, but my spine did not. "After everything I've done for you, for this family, that's what you think of me?" His smile widened. "Don't pretend you're shocked, Margaret. You knew your place. You played your part. And you'll keep doing it until I'm gone." For the first time in 70 years I felt something inside me snap. That night, I lay awake beside him, listening to the rasp of his breathing. Memories pressed down on me. Nights of silence, mornings of scorn, decades of sacrifices swallowed whole. I realized then that protecting him had cost me my life. But I had one thing left to protect: myself. And when the time came, I would make sure Walter Elwood's name died with him. Hang on, before I tell you what happened next, make sure you've subscribed and left your thoughts in the comments. This part gets intense. When I was a young girl, I thought love was supposed to save you. That's what the movies promised, what the magazines wrote in bold headlines. Love was the cure for loneliness, the key to a future brighter than anything you could imagine. And when I met Walter Elwood in 1951, I thought I'd found exactly that. He was 20, handsome in a sharp kind of way, with dark hair combed back and a smile that made girls whisper behind their hands. He worked at the hardware store then, carrying boxes with an ease that drew attention. Everyone said he had ambition, that he'd go far. I was 17, working part-time at the bakery, sweeping flour from the counters and handing out pastries wrapped in wax paper. Walter started coming in on his lunch breaks, buying a single roll, sometimes a slice of pie. He'd linger at the counter, teasing me, asking questions about my day. No boy had ever looked at me like that, like I was the only person in the room. When he asked me to a dance, my heart nearly burst out of my chest. We married 2 years later. I wore a second-hand dress, he wore his father's suit, and everyone clapped as we walked down the church steps, arm in arm like the start of a fairy tale. But fairy tales are written with endings. Real life is not. The cracks appeared early. On our honeymoon in Chicago, I remember standing at the hotel window, watching the city lights flicker. I turned to him, full of awe, wanting to share the moment. "Isn't it beautiful?" Yes. He didn't even glance out. "Close the curtain, Margaret. People can see in." Seemed so small, so silly. I laughed nervously, obeyed, and told myself it didn't mean anything. But now, looking back, I see it was the first of many times Walter shut out the world, and me along with it. By our first anniversary, I had begun to understand his temper. He wasn't cruel in the way some men were. He didn't raise his hand, didn't shout in the streets. His cruelty was sharper, quieter. When I made a roast that was a little too dry, he pushed the plate away. My mother would have done better. When I bought a new dress with money I'd saved from sewing for neighbors, he smirked. "You don't need new clothes. You're not trying to impress anyone." When I mentioned maybe taking night classes at the community college, his face hardened. "And who will keep the house while you're playing at being smart?" Each time I bit my tongue. Women in our town were raised to believe marriage was a duty, not a choice. A good wife kept the peace. A good wife kept her husband happy. So I smiled. I swallowed the hurt. And I told myself things would get better once we had a family. Our son Daniel was born in 1955. He was the light of my life, a tiny bundle with a cry that filled every corner of our small home. Holding him, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. But even then, Walter found ways to remind me where I stood. When I rocked Daniel late into the night, he grumbled, "You coddle him too much. He'll grow up soft." When I read bedtime stories, Walter shook his head. "Books won't put food on the table. He needs discipline, not fairy tales." Daniel adored me, clung to me. But he feared his father. I saw it in the way his shoulders stiffened when Walter walked into the room, in the way his laughter died the moment his father's eyes fell on him. And still I said nothing. I told myself protecting Daniel meant staying quiet, keeping the peace. But what I didn't realize then was that my silence was its own kind of prison. The years blurred, birthdays, Christmas mornings, school plays. Walter always insisted we look perfect. He shined his shoes, pressed his shirts, demanded I do the same. "People are watching," he'd say. "They respect us because I make sure we look respectable." And so we posed for photos, smiling wide. My hair curled, Daniel in his little suit, Walter standing tall. To the world we were picture perfect. But behind closed doors the cracks widened. Walter grew more ambitious as the hardware store became his. He worked long hours, but instead of gratitude, he carried bitterness home. "This is all on my back," he'd mutter. "No one helps me. You don't know what it's like to provide for a family." I wanted to scream that I worked too, that raising Daniel, scrubbing floors, stretching pennies until they snapped was work. But I didn't. Because I had learned what happened when I challenged him. The cold silences. The sharp, mocking words. The way he'd twist my every complaint into proof that I was ungrateful, foolish, unworthy. So I smiled. And I stayed. By the time Daniel was grown, married with children of his own, the house had become a mausoleum. Walter sat in his chair, grumbling at the news, dismissing everything I said. "Margaret, you don't know what you're talking about. Margaret, stop fussing. Margaret, don't embarrass me." I had given him my youth, my dreams, my voice. And still it wasn't enough. The cruelest part wasn't what he said to me. It was what he made others believe. At church he was charming, generous with handshakes. At the diner he tipped big, called waitresses sweetheart. At family gatherings, he raised his glass and toasted to my darling Margaret, who has stood by me all these years. Everyone admired him. And if I so much as flinched, if I let the truth leak into my eyes, He'd squeeze my hand under the table and whisper, "Don't ruin this for me." So I didn't. I let the world think Walter Elwood was a good man. I protected him, even as he destroyed me. Looking back now, I see the pattern clear as day. The way he cut me off when I spoke. The way he belittled every effort I made. The way he shaped me into silence year after year, until I barely recognized my own voice. And I see why the betrayal cut so deep. It wasn't just the words he said to Anna on that porch. It wasn't just his dismissal, his arrogance. It was 70 years of cracks finally splitting open, leaving me with one impossible question. Had my entire life been wasted on a man who never saw me as anything more than a shadow at his side? That night, lying awake, I realized I already knew the answer. And it terrified me. The silence of the house was deafening. Walter slept soundly, as if his words meant nothing, as if decades of cruelty were just the air he breathed. But I stared into the dark, my chest heavy, my mind racing. And for the first time I allowed myself to wonder what it would mean to stop protecting him. The thought was terrifying. It was also liberating. Because maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to protect myself. Before we move on, take a second to hit subscribe and drop a comment. I'd love to hear what you think so far. Betrayal doesn't always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it trickles in like rain through a cracked roof. Slow, steady, soaking everything you thought was safe until you're shivering in a house you no longer recognize. For me, it came the day I found the box. It was winter, the kind that sank its teeth deep into your bones. Walter had gone to the doctor for one of his routine visits, grumbling about how much he hated waiting rooms. I stayed home, restless, cleaning to keep the silence at bay. In the back of the closet, behind moth-eaten coats and forgotten shoes, I stumbled across an old trunk. Dust coated the lid. My first thought was that it belonged to my parents. Old linens, maybe, or keepsakes. But when I pried it open, I found something else entirely. Papers. Receipts. Letters. First, I didn't understand. The handwriting wasn't mine. The words weren't meant for me. "Walter, thank you for last weekend. I still can't believe how alive I feel when I'm with you. I wish she knew the truth, that you deserve better than a shadow beside you." My knees buckled. I sat right there on the floor, my hands trembling so badly the paper crumpled. There were dozens of letters. Some written in neat script, others scribbled quickly, like they'd been dashed off in stolen moments. They stretched back decades. The earliest dated 1964. I was barely a year into our marriage then, still learning how to fold his shirts the way he liked, still believing we were building something together. All that time, and he had someone else. It wasn't just the letters. There were deeds, legal documents bearing Walter's signature, an estate, a property I had never seen, bought with money I didn't know we had. There were photographs too. Blurred snapshots of a younger Walter. His arms slung around a woman with dark hair. They looked happy, genuine, the way I had once dreamed we'd look together. Each piece was a shard of glass, cutting deeper into me the longer I looked. When Walter returned home that afternoon, I couldn't speak. I couldn't even look at him. I cooked dinner, set the table, nodded at his gruff stories about the doctor's office. Inside I was screaming. But the scream stayed lodged in my throat, because what was the point? If I confronted him, he'd twist it. He'd call me paranoid. He'd laugh. He'd remind me I was nothing without him. And after 70 years I almost believed it. I didn't confront him that night. Or the night after. Or the month after. Instead, I hid the box under my bed, pulling it out late at night when he slept. I read the letters until the words blurred. I traced the photographs with shaking fingers. And each time I asked myself the same question. How could I have been so blind? The answer was simple. 'Cause I wanted to be. Because it was easier to believe in the lie, to protect the illusion of marriage, than to face the truth that my life had been built on sand. The final blow came months later. We were at dinner, just the two of us. The television hummed in the background, casting flickering light across his face. He set down his fork, wiped his mouth, and said it as casually as if he were commenting on the weather. "You know, Margaret, you were never really what I wanted." Froze. "What?" He didn't look up. He sipped his water. "You were convenient," said he. "Someone to keep the house, raise the boy, make sure I looked respectable. But want? Well, that belonged to someone else." The world spun. I gripped the edge of the table, my nails digging into the wood. "Then why?" My voice was barely a whisper. "Why marry me? Why stay?" Finally he met my eyes. And in them I saw no remorse. Only arrogance. Because it suited me. That was the moment I broke. Not when I found the letters. Not when I discovered the cottage. Not even when I saw the photographs of him smiling a smile I had never earned. It was when he told me to my face that I had never been enough. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, listening to his steady breathing beside me, and felt something inside me shatter for good. For 70 years I had protected him. I had shielded his image, covered his cruelty, kept his secrets. But in protecting him I had destroyed myself. And as the dawn crept through the curtains, I realized something I had never dared to think before. I didn't have to protect him anymore. The fear came next. What would people say if they knew? Would they believe me? Or would they dismiss me as a bitter old woman lashing out in her twilight years? What about Daniel, my son? My grandchildren? Would they see me as weak for staying, or strong for finally breaking free? The questions gnawed at me. But beneath the fear was something else. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. Because if I didn't protect Walter anymore, maybe, just maybe, I could protect myself. The decision wasn't made in a rush. It came slowly, like dawn breaking after a long, endless night. But once the light crept in, there was no going back. I would no longer let Walter's name, Walter's image, Walter's lies define me. If the world remembered him, it would not be as the charming husband, the respectable shop owner, the man everyone admired. It would be as what he truly was. And if that meant his name died with him, so be it. That thought settled over me with terrifying clarity. I wasn't ready yet. But I would be. Because I had lived long enough in silence. Before we go any further, click subscribe and let me know in the comments. What would you have done in my shoes? Revenge didn't come to me all at once. It crept in like a draft under the door, subtle at first, then stronger with each passing day until it was all I could feel. 4 weeks after Walter's confession, I walked through the house like a ghost. I cooked his meals, washed his clothes, listened to his grumbling. But inside something had shifted. I was no longer shielding him. I was watching him, studying him, calculating. For 70 years I had been his shadow. Now I was learning how to step out of it. The first thing I did was gather my strength. Every morning before he woke, I pulled the box of letters and deeds from under my bed. I spread them across the quilt, studying them like a detective piecing together a case. The evidence was clear. His infidelity, his lies, his secret property. But evidence alone wasn't enough. I knew Walter. He'd laugh it off, call me senile, twist it until I looked like the villain. He had spent a lifetime perfecting that art. So, I needed a plan that stripped him of control completely. Something undeniable. Something public. The opportunity came from the most unlikely place. The obituary section of the local paper. I had been flipping through when I saw it. A man from town had died, and instead of a glowing tribute, his family had written nothing but the bare facts. No praises, no embellishments. Just, John Parker, 85. Survived by his children. Services private. The silence said more than words ever could. And in that moment I knew what I wanted. Walter Elwood's name would not live on. His legacy, his charm, his carefully curated image. It would all vanish with him. But erasing a man like Walter required precision. First, I needed to protect myself legally. I made an appointment with a lawyer, a young woman named Carla who treated me with more respect in 5 minutes than Walter had in 70 years. I brought the letters, the deeds, the photographs. I laid them out on her polished desk, my hands trembling. She studied them carefully, then looked up at me. "Mrs. Elwood, this is damning. Do you want a divorce?" I shook my head. "No, I want something stronger. When he dies, I don't want his name remembered as respectable. I don't want a funeral that paints him as a hero. I want the truth. I want to protect myself and my family from carrying his shadow any longer." Her eyes softened. "Then we'll make sure his estate reflects your wishes. And his obituary too." For the first time in decades, I felt hope crack through the heaviness in my chest. The second step was emotional armor. Walter had always known how to tear me down, how to make me doubt myself. If I was going to stand against him, I had to be ready. So I practiced. At night, when he slept, I stood in the mirror and said the words I had been too afraid to speak for 70 years. "You destroyed me. You don't own me anymore. Your name dies with you." Each time my voice grew stronger, my back straighter. I was rehearsing not for him but for me. For the moment I'd finally step into the light and claim my story. Then came the hardest part, waiting. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for the day I could finally pull the curtain back on Walter Elwood's performance and reveal the man he truly was. The universe has a cruel way of providing. One evening, Walter collapsed in the living room. One moment he was grumbling about the news. The next, his face twisted, his body crumpled. I called the ambulance, my hands steady, my voice calm. At the hospital, the doctor said the words I had both dreaded and longed for. "His heart is failing. It's only a matter of time." Walter was 87, frail, bitter, tethered to machines. As I sat beside his bed, watching the man who had towered over my life shrink into weakness, I felt nothing. No grief, no panic, only clarity. This was the moment I had been preparing for. In the days that followed, I made my arrangements. I told the children, Daniel and his family, that when the time came, the service would be private. No grand speeches, no glowing tributes, just honesty. Daniel looked conflicted, torn between loyalty and truth. "Mom, are you sure? People will talk." I met his eyes. "Let them. I've been silent for 70 years. I won't stay silent in death too." He nodded slowly, tears welling in his eyes. "Then I'll stand with you." That night I wept, not for Walter but for the years I had lost, the years I would never get back. But woven into the grief was something new. Freedom. The last time I saw Walter conscious, he tried to sneer. His voice was weak, but the venom was the same. "You'll keep protecting me, Margaret. You always have. You don't have the spine to do anything else." I leaned in close, so close he could see the fire in my eyes. "You're wrong," I whispered. "I protected you for 70 years. But at 84, I finally learned how to protect myself." For the first time in our long, bitter marriage, he looked afraid. As I left the hospital that night, I felt the weight of 70 years lift from my shoulders. The plan was set, the stage prepared. When Walter Elwood died, his name would die with him, and the world would finally see me, not as his shadow but as myself. Real quick, subscribe and share your thoughts below before we get to the part that still makes my heart race. The end came on a gray morning in early spring. Rain tapped against the hospital windows, steady and unrelenting, like a clock counting down. Walter Elwood took his final breath just after dawn. The nurse called me first, her voice gentle. "Mrs. Elwood, I'm sorry. He's gone." I thanked her, hung up the phone, and sat in silence. My tea went cold beside me. For 70 years, I had rehearsed what I would feel when this moment came. Would I sob, collapse, feel hollowed out? But all I felt was release. A tether I hadn't realized was choking me finally snapped, and I inhaled fully, deeply, for the first time in decades. The days that followed were a blur of logistics. Papers signed, calls made, arrangements confirmed. People expected me to host a grand funeral. Walter had been respected, after all. The hardware store owner, the charming neighbor, the man with the quick smile. But I had other plans. When the funeral director asked what inscription I wanted on the obituary, I said clearly, "None." He blinked. "None." "Yes," I replied. "No praise. No embellishments. Just the facts." And so, the notice in the Willow Creek Gazette reads simply, Walter Elwood, 87. Survived by his wife, Margaret, and his son, Daniel. Services private. No list of accomplishments. No glowing eulogies. Just his name stripped bare. When Daniel came over that evening, he looked at me with a mixture of grief and admiration. "Mom," he said, sitting heavily at the kitchen table. "People are already talking. They're saying it's strange that Dad deserved more." I placed my hand over his. "Daniel, your father didn't deserve more. He spent his life building a mask. If I let that mask stay on in death, then I've wasted my life protecting it." Daniel's eyes glistened. Slowly he nodded. "Then I'll back you. Whatever comes." And in that moment, I knew I wasn't alone anymore. The service was held in the smallest room at the funeral home. No flowers. No choir. Just a few chairs, plain and unadorned. Relatives came expecting grandeur. They whispered, glancing around, confused. "Is this it?" one cousin murmured. This was it. When it came time for words, the director gestured to me. I stood, my legs trembling but my voice steady. "I was married to Walter for 70 years. I began. To many of you he was a friend, a colleague, a neighbor. You knew his smile, his handshake, his jokes." I paused, letting the silence stretch. But I knew another side. I knew the man behind the mask. The man who belittled, who deceived, who betrayed. For 70 years I protected that man. I covered his sins. I let the world believe he was better than he was. But today I protect myself instead. And that means telling the truth. Gasps rippled through the room. Murmurs rose. A few faces paled, others hardened. Continued. Walter Elwood does not leave behind a legacy of kindness. He leaves behind lessons. Lessons of what silence can cost, of what endurance without voice can do. His name will not live on in reverence. It ends here with him. I stepped back, my heart pounding, my chest heaving. For the first time, I wasn't speaking as Walter's wife. I was speaking as Margaret Elwood myself. The aftermath was messy. Some relatives avoided me afterward, muttering about how I had smeared his memory. Others, mostly women, squeezed my hand, tears in their eyes, whispering, "Thank you. Thank you for saying it." Daniel stood tall beside me, his arm around my shoulder. Anna wept openly, clutching my hand. My grandchildren watched me with awe, not pity. And Walter. He lay in his coffin, silent, powerless. His smirk gone forever. The whispers in town lasted for weeks. People debated in hushed voices at the diner, in the aisles of the grocery store. Some defended him. Others began to share their own stories. Moments when Walter's charm had cracked, when his cruelty had slipped through. For the first time the truth spread. Not because Walter wanted it, but because I finally spoke it. One evening, after the storm had settled, I walked to the estate. Not to his cottage, it no longer mattered, but to the water's edge. The sky was painted in streaks of pink and gold, the kind of sunset that demanded to be remembered. I sat on a bench, listening to the water lap against the shore, and felt peace. For 70 years, I had carried a weight that was never mine to bear. I had let his name define me. His shadow consumes me. But now I was free. I thought of all the years I'd lost, all the words I'd swallowed. Regret tightened my throat, but only for a moment. Because regret wasn't the end of my story. Reclamation was. That night, as I looked in the mirror, I studied my reflection. The lines etched deep into my face, the silver in my hair, the eyes that had seen too much. For the first time I didn't see weakness. I saw survival. And I whispered to myself, his name dies with him. Mine lives on. For 70 years I kept his secrets. But at 84 I spoke mine. Walter Elwood's legacy ended the day he did, but my story continues. Not as his shadow, but as my own name, my own voice, my own truth. If my story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true stories of betrayal, survival, and justice. Because sometimes silence hides the pain, but truth delivers the freedom.